Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, Wednesday, October 2nd. The basketball season not too far off, and Tony Adragna of IU Film Room, he also does a lot of things for the Assembly Call, is back on Podcast on the Brink. Tony, it's been a while since we've last talked, but good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, Alex, always happy to be here on Podcast on the Brink and looking forward to talking some Hoosiers basketball. And it's crazy how close we are to basketball season. You know, exhibition is like 3 weeks away or something along those lines against Tennessee. So super excited to talk some IU hoops.
Before we dig into this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink, just wanted to take a moment and introduce our new sponsor for Podcast on the Brink this season, Visit Bloomington. They're now a proud partner of Podcast on the Brink and Indiana University Athletics as well. From the excitement of college sports to local hotspots, Bloomington offers something for every Hoosier fan. Cheer on your cream and crimson while enjoying delicious food and drinks at mainstays like Crazy Horse, or explore the iconic Hoosier basketball trail and discover the rich history of Indiana basketball. Go to visitbloomington.com for all the details and get started on planning your basketball getaway today. Tony, what's your favorite thing to visit in Bloomington when you get a chance to go back?
Oh man, I'm a sucker for like the sample gates. You know, it's just like such an iconic thing. You know, like every time, basically, you know, I just had a new kid like 8 weeks ago. Every time, you know, we bring the kid down there for the first time, we always go to the sample gates, get a picture. My wife and I got engagement pictures done there, so I'm kind of a sucker for the sample gates. But I mean, you can't go wrong with a lot of things in Bloomington. I'm a big fan of a lot of the local establishments down there. You know, I'm now only like 30 minutes away from Bloomington, so I'm like dead center between Bloomington and Indianapolis. So I'm excited that I get to go down to Bloomington in a fairly quick drive and see a lot of cool things. So definitely can't go wrong with a lot of things down in Bloomington.
Absolutely. Thanks again to Visit Bloomington for sponsoring the show this season. Really excited about that partnership, and we hope that you'll check them out over at visitbloomington.com. Now to this week's show. Tony, as I mentioned, I believe the last time we had you on, you were down on spring break in Florida. I think you joined us from your car. We talked about Bryson Tucker committing. That was before everything happened with the transfer portal, really, with Indiana last spring. So I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on the job that the coaching staff did in terms of retooling this roster, the changes that they made. I know you and you've talked about this. Were a pretty vocal critic last season of how things went, and I think you've also kind of said recently that you were excited about the roster makeover. I'm just curious, when you kind of look at it as a whole, big picture view, how impressed were you with the job that the coaching staff did in terms of remaking this roster going into the season?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I'm a critic when I think there's things to be critical of, and, you know, I'll sing praises when I think there's things to praise. And, you know, I think by any stretch of the imagination, most of last season was disappointing for Indiana fans. But I'll say from like mid-February on, the coaching staff has really kind of had like a reclamation project where like pretty much everything has gone right. Now, granted, a lot of that didn't have to do with on-court results, but Indiana did finish the season strong last year. You know, they had a winning streak, and things seemed like they were kind of coming together. And then, you know, like as you mentioned, they go out, they get Bryson Tucker, and then the portal starts. And by any metric, I think most sites will have Indiana as a top 5 to 10 portal class, some as good as the best portal class. And so, you know, you have to tip your cap there. And, you know, you'll have people that'll say, well, they've got the most money. Like, of course, they'll go get a good portal class. However, I think Indiana has done a nice job. And they first, you know, the portal season starts in like December. You're trying to figure out, all right, who might be portaling? How, you know, what relationships do we have to work on that? Like, it's not just like, all right, it's March, and oh, this guy entered the portal. Let's go see what he's up to. Like, there's a lot of work done on the portal far far before like the portal opening, and you start figuring out who might be in it. What relationships do you have that you can work? So I think Indiana did a nice job of figuring out, all right, here's the types of guys we want to target. Here's who we may specifically target. And then you still have to close them. Like you can say money is a factor, absolutely, but you still have to bring them on campus. You still have to show them a vision of what they can do in your program and how they can operate. And for many guys, that's how can we get them to the next level. And so there's things that you have to sell that I think the Indiana staff knocked out of the park. And then really in terms of what wins college basketball games, I know we're going to dive into these guys at a deeper level, but you go get dynamic guards in Rice and Carlisle, and you get a kind of a stretch 4 type in Luke Goody, and all of a sudden Indiana's style of play that a lot of people have kind of ragged on looks like it could be much different. Now, they did also go get Oumar Ballo, and they're still going to probably, they're going to start Reneau, so you're still going to start 2 bigs at the 4 and the 5, but they have a lot more opportunities to be dynamic in how they operate. And so, you have to tip your cap to them. And then, just recently getting the Trent Sisley commitment, they've had a lot of really solid players on campus. Obviously, the kind of the golden goose is Mullins, and you still have got irons in the fire with Rebe and Michael Brown. So there's a lot of things to be excited about on the recruiting front. But you have to tip your cap to the staff and how they were able to kind of retool the roster and really get it in a place that looks like a roster that can win in March. And that's ultimately what you're trying to build. So, again, props to the staff. They've done a great job in terms of getting, I think, the right guys in the room and on the bus. And now we'll see how it translates to the court here very shortly.
So of the portal additions, which player, if you had to pick one player, who do you think will be the most impactful? We've seen an early, I think, preseason Big Ten team came out yesterday from the Big Ten. I think the unofficial official media poll will be coming out very soon for the league. I was more in the camp of Myles Rice kind of being the guy that's going to make the biggest impact. We've seen Oumar Ballo be voted preseason All Big Ten first team. Not to make you choose a player in terms of which one's better or anything like that. I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, when you look at the guys that they brought in, who's the biggest game changer of these transfer portal additions?
Yeah, far and away, to me, it's Myles Rice. Guards win. And when you look at Indiana's roster last season, they didn't have a problem in their front court. Malik Reneau and Khalil Ware were, if not the best, one of the best front courts in the Big Ten. Where they struggled mightily was in their guard play. And, not to take shots at Gabe Cupps, he just was not ready to lead a Big Ten offense. So when Xavier Johnson went down, you really kind of had to have Trey Galloway more so initiate the offense. Gabe Cupps held the point guard title, and he would do that from time to time. But when Indiana was at its best, it was really when Trey Galloway was kind of running the offense, coming off pick and rolls with Khalil Ware and Malik Reneau. And that's no knock on Trey Galloway, but he's very much better as a secondary creator. And we saw that a couple seasons ago with Trace Jackson Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino. Like, Trey Galloway is a very vital piece to what Indiana's going to do. But when he's the guy that's kind of the man running the offense, that's other teams are able to key on that because that if the ball's out of his hands, the other guys aren't really able to create. Now you've got a Myles Rice who, if you read or you watch any of your media day stuff, the guys just talk about how fast he is and just has the ball in his hands and he can just get up and down the floor quickly. And that just changes the game for an offense. A guy that can initiate offense quickly, he gets the ball to the right people. And, more so than anything, he's got great vision. He's got, good assist rate. He can shoot the ball. He can put the ball in the bucket. It almost sounds like, and this is, reading tea leaves a bit, but from what Mike Woodson was saying, he almost has to get him to like look to score less right now. Like he kind of said something along the lines of like, trying to get him to understand there's other guys on the court. He doesn't have to do it all himself. And that's paraphrasing. But yeah, I mean, to me, he's just very impactful. And to me, he's like 1A, and then Carlisle's 1B. Carlisle had an up and down season last year, but it's hard to gauge anything from that Stanford team. They were just a mess. And Carlisle, he had a game where he had 35 points, against a Pac-12 opponent. Like, the dude can fill it up. He can put the ball in the bucket. And now he might be, option number 4 on this team. He could be option number 1 at certain times. Like, there's numerous guys that can put the ball in the bucket for Indiana now. And so when you've got a guy like Carlisle that doesn't really have to be the focal point of the offense, but can still give you, 30 in a given game, that's exciting to me. And it's just a stark change from where Indiana has been, and really since the Tom Crean era, in terms of just dynamic guard play and guards that can put the ball in the bucket, create things for themselves and others. And so to me, that's why those two are the most impactful. But make no mistake about it, the other guys they got are going to go help them win a game. Like Ballo, in terms of his rebounding, like that's somewhere that Indiana has lacked, on the rebounding side of the ball. Offensive rebounding, Indiana has historically just not been good at it for quite some time. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think at one point last year they were in the 300s for offensive rebounding rate. And for the front court that they employed, that just like almost unacceptable. And now you've got a guy in Ballo that really just goes up and gets rebounds. And really that might be where his greatest impact is. Don't get me wrong, he can go score and he can play in the pick and roll, but if he can clean up the glass, both offensively and defensively, that changes the game. Because if you look at Indiana's offensive rebounds they gave up last season, if you've got a guy like Ballo that goes up and gets those, and then he can initiate the break, and you've got a guy like Myles Rice initiating the break, at a fast clip, like that just, it turns from you giving up 2 points to you scoring 2 points, which is a 4-point swing and can swing the momentum in a game. And you look at some of those big momentum swings that Indiana had last season, it's a game changer. And then, you've got Luke Goody, who can stretch the floor and has played Big Ten basketball and understands what that's all about. And so, again, you just have to tip your cap, because what Indiana has lacked, or their weaknesses have been the last couple of seasons, it really seems like they went out and tried to cover those up to the best of their ability.
When you look at the perimeter shooting, which has clearly been an issue, not just in Mike Woodson's era, really going back to the end of Tom Crean was the last time Indiana had a what I would call a competent 3-point shooting team. I mean, there were some of those Crean teams. I remember a game against Illinois where they knocked down something like 18 or 23s, and it was just, it kind of showed the power of when you have that type of firepower offensively, it doesn't really matter how well you guard. It's kind of the Iowa theory, right? If you can just bury a team with your offense, you can win a lot of games. But that's not been Indiana. It wasn't Indiana under Archie Miller. It's not been Indiana so far under Mike Woodson. But I think one of the biggest questions I have, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this, because you've watched these guys a lot on film, particularly with Rice and Carlisle. You look at their 3-point shooting numbers last year, they weren't great. But when you watch both of those guys, and this is just me talking, you may differ, I don't look at them on film as guys that have anything wrong in particular with their shots. Maybe it was the looks they were getting and how they had to get the looks, but are both of those guys capable of shooting in the mid-30s from a percentage standpoint from three? And do you think overall with Mgbako and Goody and what potentially Rice and Carlisle can do, does Indiana have enough 3-point shooting? I'm not saying they're going to be a team that's going to take a crazy volume of 3-pointers. I don't think any of us believe that to be the case, but I think Indiana needs to up the volume at least somewhat, and also become more efficient with the 3-point shot. And I feel like just kind of looking at Rice and Carlisle, they could be the keys. If they can kind of lift those numbers up, then it could be a complete game changer for the offense.
100%. And Rice is a really interesting one, because he was like a mid-30s 3-point shooter all the way through February, and then he missed his last 20 of the season or something crazy like that. And so, your numbers are what they are. I'm not trying to make excuses.
Right.
You missed 20 in a row. Like, something obviously had gone wrong, but there is some context there. He's a guy that was coming off of chemotherapy, and, I think it's kind of natural that as the season wore on and his body broke down a little bit, that, shots were harder to find. And so now he's got another year of conditioning under his belt and things like that, where I think I'd be shocked if you saw another trail off, to that extent with a guy like Rice. But as you mentioned, you watch him shoot, and he's fluid in his motions. He's able to create, and he's got a really nice looking shot. And so for him, I think mid-30s is very much in the cards. And then Carlisle is the interesting one for me, because as a catch and shoot 3-point shooter last season, he was 40% from three. And then when he was shooting off the dribble or shooting contested long range shots, he was like 20%. And that's, a vast difference. And the shots that he's going to get in Indiana's offense, I think, with other creators on the floor in Rice and a Galloway and Mgbako that can knock down shots. You've got a Malik Reneau on the block that can create offense and force double teams and things like that. The majority of Carlisle's threes, I would think, are going to be more of that catch and shoot variety versus trying to create his own shot. Again, Stanford was just a hot mess last season watching them on film. A lot of his shots were 10 seconds left on the shot clock, ball goes in his hands, and they're just like, hey, figure something out here. And so in this offense with the other weapons that he's got, I think his three-point shooting is going to see quite the increase. Now, I could be completely wrong in that, and he's shooting only off the dribble or off of ball screens, but I would guess that more of his shots as more of a secondary creator guy are going to be of the catch and shoot variety. And that's historically how 3-point shots have come in Mike Woodson's offense, right? He's not like running a bunch of screens for guys to come off, or saying, hey, come off this ball screen and chuck a three. Like, usually it's more of an inside out approach, and you're going to get a catch and shoot shot from somebody else creating offense for you. And so I think you're going to see a big jump in his play, but more so than anything, is that you're going to see the biggest leaps in play from your freshman to your sophomore season, historically, as a college basketball player. Both those guys have only had one season of college basketball under their belts. Now, granted, Rice has been in the college game for quite some time, but last season was his first season. And so this is the year we would likely see their biggest jumps. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, is, historically speaking, this is where we're going to see it. And so that's for a variety of reasons. Your first season of college basketball is usually quite the shell shock. I mean, look no farther than Mackenzie Mgbako last year. The first half of the season versus the second half of the season, once he kind of got his sea legs and how to adjust to college basketball, was much different. So I think both of those guys are very capable of being, mid-30s 3-point shooters. And to me, that just opens everything else up, right? Because make no mistake about it, Indiana's still going to throw the ball inside. They've got two good inside presences. And I think they've already said, like, look, we're not just going to abandon the post up. And so if you've got guys that can shoot, then the defenses have to make decisions. And if you're going to single cover Malik Reneau, I don't think there's many people that can stop him in college basketball single covered in the post. I mean, look at the UConn game last year. Like, Caravan could not stop Malik Reneau one-on-one, to where UConn had to adjust, start doubling him. Then Indiana started, breaking shots. So there's so many things that open up when you've got these guys that can shoot. But I think more so than anything, like, you had a Mackenzie Mgbako that could shoot last year, but he can't really create his own shot. Well, now you've got three creators really on Indiana. And, well, four, assuming Cups makes a leap, in Carlisle and Rice and Galloway, and then assuming Cups makes a leap, you've got four guys that can kind of create offense for others. And when you have guys around them that can shoot the ball and guys in the post that can go score it, like, that just stresses the defense out. And it's just something Indiana hasn't had, like you said, since really like 2016. And so it's been quite some time. So I'm excited to see how that all kind of looks gelling together.
In terms of Mgbako, he's a guy that you just made an interesting point in terms of his offense. He obviously, the strength of his game is the perimeter shot in the mid range, but didn't create a whole lot for himself off the dribble or getting to the basket. I think he did a little bit better job of that as the season went along, using his body a little bit on some of these smaller wings in the Big Ten, and something that I think he needs to do more, just based on the fact that he's such a great free throw shooter, right? And he has that size advantage. He can, if he can improve his handle a little bit and get to the rim a little bit more, I think it's helpful for him. When you look at his freshman year, I think a lot of people like to point to, well, he only shot low 30s in the three-point line, but look at the Big Ten only numbers. He was like high 37%, so that did show improvement as the year went along. What, in your eyes, are the biggest areas for him to improve upon this season? And before you give your answer, to me, kind of what sticks out to me, and I'm curious if you agree with this, just the defense being more consistent and the rebounding, to me, are two things that you look at him only averaging just over 4 rebounds per game last year for a guy who's 6'8" last year. Now he's listed at 6'9". I feel like the numbers need to be a little bit better than that. Isn't that amazing, Tony, that he's now listed at 6'9"? Maybe he's one of the rare guys that's still growing this late in his development.
Yeah, and then he'll go measure at the combine, and they'll measure him without shoes and be like 6'6" and 3/4.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I'm with you. His defensive awareness, and not taking plays off, and just being locked into the game plan, the scouting report, 100% of the time is really where he can take a leap on the defensive end. Like last year, I mean, I had never really seen anything like it. His first 6-7 games, like just very lost on the defensive end. Like looked kind of rigid in his movement. There was no fluidity to kind of how he was operating. And to his credit and to the staff's credit, that got a lot better. However, now he's got a year under his belt. He understands the system. It's to no fault of his own. Like he played in a system in high school and even in AAU where he played 2-3 zone. He stood in the corner and probably never really had to learn like defensive principles at a deeper level. And so it was, he went from like basketball 101 to like master's level course with nothing in between. And as you can imagine, if you did that in any subject, your head's just kind of spinning. And then you're on national TV kind of showcasing, that's your test. And so, again, no fault of his own. I think the staff did a nice job of kind of making things simpler for him. I honestly think that's why we didn't see a lot of him at the 4, is that's different responsibilities. And if you have him learning that 3 and then that 4, and it's just like, whoa, like what are we doing here? And so I think that's primarily why we didn't see a lot of him at the 4, is just like, hey, lock in on this 3 spot. Let's get you that figured out, and then we can go from there. You've already heard Mike Woodson mentioning Mgbako at the 4 in some of his press coverage. And so, yeah, defensive awareness is going to be big. And then, like you said, rebounding the ball. Indiana just, again, struggled rebounding the ball at various times the last decade. He's got to go hit and get more. Again, a lot of times shot goes up, turn, watch. If it comes to me, I'll go get it. Now it's like, all right, go be, quote unquote, a dog and just go try to get every rebound. And especially offensively, like I think Indiana definitely should be sending 3 guys to the glass aggressively. And again, you go get an offensive rebound, you're either probably getting a layup or you're getting fouled. And he's a great free throw shooter, as you mentioned. What I'm interested in this season is, like you said, the jury's out on him that he's a really good knockdown shooter, especially when he's open. Guys are going to be able to create for him more. I think he's going to see a lot of hard closeouts or teams keying on him a little bit more. So now it's more about like reading those closeouts. How do you attack those closeouts? When do you shoot the ball on a hard closeout? When do you go attack? How do you get to the rim a little bit better? Like, what's your secondary move in those scenarios? And so it sounds like all indications are that he's been shooting the ball really well in off-season workouts. Sound like he went out, I think it was to California in the off-season, and really shot the ball well out there. So, we talk about that freshman to sophomore leap. I think we should see a big one out of him. Like I've predicted like all Big Ten season from Mgbako. And really, if Indiana does what it thinks it's capable of doing and being a contender for the Big Ten, I think Mackenzie Mgbako could possibly be around their top scorer, and you're maybe looking at conversation. I don't want to get ahead of my skis here, but a conversation of him possibly being Big Ten Player of the Year. Like if he's the top scorer on the top one or two teams, I think he's got a opportunity to put himself in that conversation. Now, granted, he has to go produce, and he's got to be better on both ends of the floor than he was last season, but all indications are that he will be.
How dependent is that, though, on him being better in some of the areas we talked about? Because he can't just be a scorer. I think that was my, a lot of people in the preseason, we did the ranking of the top 25, or actually it was top 40 this year, Big Ten players with Hoops. Obviously with the 18 teams now, we felt like we had to expand it out a little bit from 25 to 40, and still felt like we left some guys but we had, I think, Mgbako of the 4 IU guys, we had ranked the lowest of the 4. And kind of my rationale, and not to speak for Dylan Burkhardt of Hoops, but talking to him about it a little bit too, you just kind of look at Mbako's numbers, and yes, he scored the ball pretty well, but what else does he do in terms of impacting winning? And you look at the rebounding and the defense, and doesn't get a lot of assists. For him to kind of reach his ceiling as a player, don't all those other facets of the game have to become far more consistent and more part of his game in order for him to even enter that conversation?
Absolutely. And I think more than anything too is that like he's got to be multifaceted, right? He's got to be able to play the 3, he's got to be able to play the 4. He's got to, it sounds like he's put some weight on to be able to guard some 4s down in the post, which he's a super strong kid. So I don't really have any hesitations about him doing that. And oftentimes that may be a better spot for him to be, because it's not possibly a shooter that he's leaving open or, kind of losing sight of. But yeah, I mean, 100%. He's got to improve to where he's well-rounded. He can't just be a shooter and be an all Big Ten player. However, like, when you look at kind of how he played in high school, where he was, just obviously much more talented than everybody else, but he just had a fluidity to him that you didn't really see a lot of last season until maybe towards the end. And I just think he's going to have that confidence now to where he just feels comfortable on the floor. And he never really had that feeling with him last season. Now, again, he's got to go produce. But if he can be like a 15, 16 point per game guy and maybe up those rebounds by 5 or 6%, and his shooting percentage is north of 40% as a field goal percentage, and his 3-point percentage is hovering around that 37 to 40%. Like, I think he's got a really good opportunity in front of him to kind of make a name for himself. And I've honestly, like, he wants to go pro and be an NBA player. Like, I don't want to say this is his last chance, but like, as you get older, it gets harder, right? To do that. And, he came in last year mocked in a lot of first rounds and obviously fell way out of order, and then, kind of declared to go get some draft feedback. I think now that he's got that feedback, he knew what to work on. He understands, like, hey, this is legit. Like, I've got an opportunity in front of me, and it's not going to be handed to me. I got to work for it. I do think we'll see improved play and a more well-rounded player out of him. But you're right. He's got to get better in a lot of different areas to kind of maximize his value to the IU.
One thing that kind of made my ears perk up a little bit last month at Media Day, and I say last month, it was just a couple weeks ago, but technically we're now in October, so it was last month. But a lot of players were talking about rebounding as a new emphasis this year, and it was interesting to me looking at the numbers. I don't have the KenPom numbers right in front of me, but I believe Indiana was outside the top 200 in both offensive and defensive rebounding percentage, which I talked a little bit about this with Scott on last week's episode of Podcast on the Brink. It was hard. It's hard to process that when you look at how tall Indiana was as a team last year. I think in KenPom, the fourth tallest team in the country. And to be that poor of a rebounding team told me that either they didn't emphasize it enough, or their technique, or kind of what their plan was for crashing the boards wasn't where it needed to be. Is that a thing with the? I think it maybe applies a little bit more to the offensive glass, but just looking at this roster with Ballo and Reneau, it feels like to me that if Indiana is a lot more aggressive in crashing the offensive glass, I'm not saying like Michigan State early 2000 Tom Izzo level of crashing the boards, but it seemed like they were a little indifferent to that last year. And it feels to me like they could easily be picking up extra possessions and extra efficient looks on a consistent basis if they just make it a staple of what they want to do. And I think they can do it in a way where it's not really going to hurt them that much in transition. I feel like, with the guards being a little faster and being able to get up and down the floor, and Ballo in particular has played in a system at Arizona where they got up and down the court. I don't think it's going to be a problem where he's not going to be able to get back. It just seems like to me that's an easy kind of lever for the coaching staff to pull and say, let's kind of see what we can do on the offensive boards, and we can possibly make ourselves a much more efficient offensive team if we just pick up, 5 or 6 extra offensive rebounds, and all of a sudden we're drawing more fouls and getting some easy putbacks that wasn't there last year.
The kind of a coaching phrase is "you are what you emphasize," right? And it was clear the emphasis for Indiana last season was get back in transition. Like they just flat out were not, weren't crashing the offensive glass, and guys would get back, and it really looked like maybe Ware and Reneau would stay to try to get offensive rebounds, but half the time it was somewhat haphazard attempt. And and like you said, you're the fourth tallest team in the country, and it's not like that's like a faux height. Like they played more big. Like their front court from 3 through 5 were typically 6'8", now 6'9". Malik Reneau at 6'9", and then Khalil Ware, who was 7 foot. Like that is a huge front line that should be able to go get offensive rebounds. But if you're not emphasizing that, and more of your emphasis is on get back in transition, like that's what your team's going to go do. So if they're emphasizing this season rebounding the basketball, especially on the offensive end, that I think you'll see a change. Defensively, I think part of their problem, defensive rebounding, is that their defense was very susceptible to giving up threes. I mean, you look at 3-point attempts to field goal attempts in KenPom, like 40% of their opponent's field goal attempts were threes. Long shot, long rebound, better opportunity for the offense to get a rebound. And so, I think an emphasis on giving up less threes, especially in today's day and age where kids are shooting them better and better, and teams are really looking to maximize, hey, shoot threes or layups, essentially, the Alabama kind of mantra. So I think if the defense kind of emphasizes a bit more of not giving up the 3-point shot, then you probably see less long rebounds, and the team can go get better rebounding as well. And that's kind of on the other end of the coin from the offensive rebounding perspective too, is Indiana's shooting, primarily inside the arc, not as many long shots, not as many long rebounds, and their offensive rebounding isn't as strong. So I think that style of play thing we keep coming back to, both offensively and defensively. I think people primarily talk about it on the offensive side of the ball, but it's not like Indiana's defense was setting the world on fire last year. I think they were 84th in defensive efficiency on KenPom. So, they do have to change some things on that front as well to be as good as they want to be. And so, to me, that starts with really emphasizing getting out to shooters, because when you play those teams that just spread you out and space you and have good spacing, like I go back to the Penn State game at Assembly Hall, like they were just toying with Indiana on the defensive side of the ball, and were just getting open three after open three, and they were knocking them down. And Indiana went from up 10 to losing handily to Penn State at home because of those things. And that's just apparently that's just like the staple of Penn State versus Indiana the last few years. But when you play teams that emphasize that 3-point shot, especially, it's just such a game changer when they can knock down a couple in a row. You look at the Auburn game last year too, like momentum swung quickly from Indiana's favor to Auburn's favor. And it's just, you got to emphasize getting out to shooters in today's day and age. I think you're going to see less and less of kind of pack line defenses today, because teams just can shoot the ball, and the more guys that can shoot on the floor, the less impactful a pack line defense really is going to be. And so, you'll have the guys that's their staple, but for the most part, I think you'll see teams going away from that in today's day and age and be more of an aggressive approach and getting out to shooters and then rotating and help. So we'll see. I'm not here to say that Mike Woodson's defensive system is horrible. He had his first season, Indiana, I think, was a top 20 defensive efficiency team. But again, it's just what you emphasize. And so I'll be interested to see, and we'll be able to tell pretty quickly kind of the things that they're emphasizing on both ends of the floor. And that'll tell me a lot kind of about some of the changes that were made this offseason.
The words pack line brought back some ghosts of the past. Maybe quickly, when you talk about pack line and 3-point shooting, it brought me back to that first Archie Miller game at Assembly Hall when
it's a bad omen.
I sat there and watched Indiana State bury 3 after 3, and I'm like, I don't think this is what this is supposed to look like. And I remember when shortly after Mike Woodson took over, I think it was my dad that asked him a question about the pack line defense, and Woodson was kind of like, "What's the pack line?" Like he'd never heard of it. Like that was Indiana fans. They were like, "We don't want to hear those words again." So that was some good points there, Tony, on just the defense and the rebounding. And last thing I wanted to talk to you about before we wrap up this week's show is just the fit of Oumar Ballo and Malik Reneau. I think a lot of people are curious to see what that looks like. Both guys, talking to them at Media Day, were upbeat and positive. Seemed like they had a great relationship so far, excited to play with each other. Ballo is just engaging, like always a smile on his face. Seems like a guy that everyone is going to love to be around and root for. You love to see that kind of personality in the locker room. Same thing with Myles Rice. I mean, both of those guys, just engaging personalities, guys that I look at and say could be leaders, both on and off the court. But drilling down kind of into that relationship and on the court between Reneau and Ballo, it's obviously going to look different than what we saw last year with Reneau and Khalil Ware. What are the challenges, I guess, for the coaching staff to pair these two together? What can, I guess, be good about the partnership and how they fit together, and what maybe concerns do you have on how they fit together?
Yeah, to me, I've never been against a too big approach. It's more so about where are you putting those two bigs on the floor in terms of spacing, allowing your guards to create, getting to the rim. Like, where I would struggle with this pairing is if like they just plant both on the blocks and just say like, hey, go try to get a bucket. Just throw it in, go try to get a bucket, guys stand around the perimeter, which we've seen from Indiana in the past. If you have them in more screening actions where you've got one guy inside, one on the perimeter screening, whether that be a ball screen or screening away from the ball or whatever the case may be, I think where you put them on the floor is going to be the biggest factor in will this work? Because just again, spacing is offense, offense is spacing. That's a Rick Majerus quote, and it's just vital. Because if you've got two guys that are close to each other, two can guard one, and you don't open things up on the perimeter. So I'll be really interested. Horns is a set that you can run a lot of different things out of. It's an alignment where you basically have two bigs. It's called the slot. It's basically like the elbow extended up to the 3-point line. You've got two bigs there. You've got two bigs in the corners, and then you've got a guard that can make decisions off of that. Like, to me, those are the types of alignments that Indiana can thrive out of, because there's a lot you can do out of it. It's not like you just like go off a ball screen and say go play basketball. Like, you can do a lot of different things out of those horns alignments. And Indiana did some of those last season. Like, those are the types of alignments I'm hoping we'll see in the two big things, because you can still go high-low, and I think Mike Woodson calls it buddy ball. Like, I don't think you're going to see them go away from that, because it can be impactful. It's just, how are they going to utilize them? Will Malik Reneau be able to play out on the perimeter a little bit more? It sounds like they've been working with him, kind of having more guard-oriented skills. And then really what it's going to come down to for Reneau is, like, can you guard fours without fouling to keep yourself on the floor? So I think Reneau is better suited to guard fives, just from, like, he has a tendency to reach when he's guarding ball handlers. But we'll see. Like, I think it can work. I'm not against a too big alignment. It's just, how are they going to utilize them?
Yeah, I think there'll be also some opportunities where they will have to play smaller, because Ballo, you look at the minutes that he played last year, only, I think, 25, 26 minutes a game, a lot fewer than there were some games last year late in the season where Indiana was playing Khalil Ware 36, 37 minutes. I don't think you're going to see that regularly with Ballo. So I think from that perspective, there's a chance to get some other guys minutes at the four. Mackenzie Mgbako, we talked about. Maybe occasionally you see Luke Goody playing some four and give a different look. So all things to look forward to. And as you mentioned, I think we're now 3.5 weeks away from the first exhibition game, which is going to be down at Tennessee. A little bit more instructive for fans than your typical early season exhibition where you play at University of Indianapolis and it's a 40 or 50 point win. We're going to learn something about Indiana. And what I've learned from the last couple of seasons when they've had these charity exhibitions, these teams, for the most part, go out and compete and want to play hard. And I mean, going into Tennessee, they're going to be I think probably a preseason top 15, top 20 team when the AP poll comes out in a couple of weeks. So I think it'll be a good learning experience for not just the program, but for us fans and media, that are excited to kind of learn something about this team. We're going to get an early glimpse. But Tony, it's always great to catch up with you. Thanks for making the time. I guess you're officially playing zone defense over there now with the three kids. Is that right?
I am. I'm reading Jim Boeheim's book right now on how to handle the three. But no, it's been great. It's been a lot of fun. But one of them is not mobile yet, which is a game changer. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Talk to me in a year, and I'll tell you how much fun it is.
Where can IU fans follow your work again this season?
Yeah, my IU film room is primarily in the Assembly Call Substack. Usually post that about once a week. As we get into the season, I'll dive into game breakdowns, player breakdowns. Throughout the year, I'm also looking at recruits and how they might fit into the program, and then also on Twitter at Coach Adragna on Twitter. I'll let people know too, I am a coach again. I'm coaching my 4-year-old son's basketball team at Greenwood Fieldhouse. So don't come at me and tell me I'm a former coach. I am back in the coaching game officially. But no, I'm on X at Coach Adragna. I do a lot of breakdowns on there of guys. When I think I just last couple of weeks I posted things on Sisley, Harrelson, and Mullins, and kind of how their games could translate to Indiana. Obviously, Indiana landed Sisley, Harrelson to Notre Dame, and then we'll see on Mullins. But if you're into that kind of thing, and then you're also on X going to see IU football's biggest fan right now. And so I'm pretty fired up about Coach Signetti and what he's doing there too. So that's primarily where you can find me. Always open to chat about hoops. You can DM me on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. And always happy to chat hoops and especially coming here on podcasts on the Brink.
Appreciate it, Tony. You're a great resource for IU fans. It's always fun to have a conversation with you. I think from just an X's and O standpoint, you provide tremendous insight, and I know IU fans are lucky to have you as part of the community. And It's been an honor to follow your work and see it grow and continued success. I wish you with film room and everything going on over there at the assembly call. So thanks again for joining us. If you enjoyed this week's show, please leave us a rating or a review over on iTunes. Those really help kind of grow the reach of the show, get us a little higher in the algorithm if somebody searched IU basketball. Same thing over on Spotify. If you could give us a 5-star rating, I think we're up over 100 ratings over on Spotify now. So that's kind of a milestone for us. And the other thing that's kind of new now, if you're just listening to the audio version, this week we, for the first time, posted, beginning with this episode, are posting the full video recording of the show over on YouTube. So if you have a chance to go over there, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out the video of the episode. We'd appreciate if you do that, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.